Hello, how are you? Today is our session. We proceed with our subject which is known as literature in English. So on the last period, we ended where we were discussing about the functions or roles or importance of literature. And I gave you a task which demanded you to discuss a lot about functions of literature. So on today, on this period, we proceed with forms or types of literature. So today we have to be very careful about forms or types of literature. So in literature can be categorized into major two types, which are, in literature we are going to discuss two types of literature. So these are major types of literature, which are, the first one is oral literature and second one is written literature. So these are two major types of literature, which are oral literature and written literature. So when we speak about oral literature, it simply means that is a type of literature which is delivered orally. Example of oral literature are riddles, proverbs, idioms, etc. So when you speak about oral literature, is a type or is a kind of literature which is delivered, which is transformed from one person to another through words of mouth. So the point which you have to take into consideration is that when you speak about oral literature, it simply means that is any kind of literature which is transformed through words of mouth or through orally. So I will use my mouth to deliver to you any kind of literary work. So if I can deliver any kind of literary work by using my mouth, so you have to know that this is a oral literature. That's why it is delivered orally or through words of mouth. So there are a lot of examples of oral literature, but some of them are riddles, proverbs, idioms, sayings, songs, and among others. But these are good examples of oral literature. So you have to be very careful about oral literature. And if we want to define this term or this type of literature, you have to know that this is transformed through words of mouth. So if I can narrate you a story by using my mouth, you have to know this is oral literature. If I can tell you any short formulaic form like a proverb or a riddle and among others, you have to know that this is oral literature. So the second type of literature is written literature. So when you speak about written literature is a type of literature that is transformed through written form. So when you speak about written literature is a type of literature which is transformed through in written form. So if you are reading any kind of literature, if you are reading any kind of literary work, if you are reading, it simply means that it has been written somewhere. So if it has been written somewhere, you have to know that this is written literature. That's why it is written form, it is transformed, it is delivered through written form. So we have a lot of examples, or we have a lot of books or texts which have written with several authors. And the example of this, there are a lot of them, but some of them there is a book which is known as This Time Tomorrow. There is another book which is known as My Concubine. There is another novel which is known as Passed Like a Shadow, a Man of the People. So these are examples of written literature. So here there are some examples of written literature which are a play, a novel, short stories, and a poet. So these are types or examples of written literature. So these are two types of literature. So after discussing a lot about these two major types of literature, which are oral literature and written literature, let us now go directly to the differences. Differences between oral literature and the written literature. So here now we are going to discuss about the difference between oral literature and the written literature. So how can we distinguish between oral literature and the written literature? That's why these are two types of literature, and they differ one after another. So you have to follow me perpendicularly about those differences between oral literature and the written literature. The first difference between oral literature and the written literature is through presentation. So the first difference between oral literature and the written literature is through presentation. How is delivered? How is it presented from an author or from a narrator to the audience or to the readers? So how do we present help us to differentiate between oral literature and the written literature? So oral literature is presented or is delivered through words of mouth or through by using our mouths. So in written literature is a type of literature which is delivered through written form. So how it is presented help us to differentiate between oral literature and oral literature. So when we speak about oral literature is presented through words of mouth, and the written literature is presented through in written form. So that is first difference between oral literature and the written literature. And the second one is through preparation. So also we can differentiate between oral literature and the written literature through how one among of these is prepared. So oral literature does not need a lot of preparation, while in written literature you have to prepare yourselves. You have to prepare yourself. So if we want to write or to prepare or to compose any literary work, that I mean written literature, you have to spend a lot of time to find out a lot of issues that can help you when you are composing a certain text. So that make these two types of literature differ one after another. That's why oral literature does not demand a lot of preparation, while written literature demands you to use a lot of time. So that is another distinction between oral literature and the written literature. So I can decide, I'm on in front of you, I can decide myself to deliver to you any kind of oral literature without making any preparation. But if I can decide to write or to compose or to deliver to you written literature, any kind of written literature, I must prepare some issues. So I can't deliver to you any kind of written literature without making any prior preparation. So due to those preparations that can be done either in oral literature or written literature, make these two types of literature differ one after another. And another difference between oral literature and the written literature is through their types. So when we speak about written literature, there are only 4 types of oral literature. In types also make these two types of literature differ one after another. That's why written literature, there are only 4 types of written literature, which are play or drama, novel, short stories, and poetry. So these are 4 major types of oral literature. But when you can come back on oral literature, there are a lot of examples. There are a lot of types of oral literature. Some of them are songs, proverbs, riddles, sayings, idioms, and among others. So due to how many types of some categories of oral literature and written literature make these 2 major types of literature differ one after another. That's why when you speak on when you can trace back on written literature, there are only 4, but on oral literature there are a lot of them. So that make also these 2 main types of literature differ one after another. Also, another difference between oral literature and written literature is through costs. So if I want to prepare or to deliver to you any kind of oral literature, does not demand me to have any amount of money. That's why I can use my mouth to deliver to you without making any kind of preparation that can demand me to use any amount of money. But in written literature, you can't prepare any kind of written literature without having a lot of money. That's why you are supposed to have an amount of money so as to buy some materials that will help you to prepare written literature. Example, you have to buy a pen, a pencil, you are supposed to have a dictionary or papers and among other materials. So those materials which are supposed to have anybody who wants to prepare written literature demand or need to have money so as to accommodate. So that also make these 2 types of literature to be differ one after another. So that is another difference between written literature and oral literature. Another difference is through their sources and the ends. So these 2 types of literature also differ one after another due to how can be started and how can be finalized. And if we want, and a vivid example of it is that oral literature, the source of oral literature is where a person wants to narrate. That is the source. And the end of the oral literature is where people want or admire to listen what is narrated by a person. So that is the source of oral literature and the end of oral literature. And when we can come back on written literature, the source of written literature is where a person wants to prepare, to write. So writing is a source of written literature, and its final is where people read what a person have been wrote or have been written. So these, due to its sources and the ends, make these 2 types of literature to be differ one after another due to how it can be written and how can be finalized. So that is another difference between oral literature and the written literature. Also, another difference is through owners who are owning any kind of literary work. So due to how a certain kind of literary work can be owned, make these 2 types of literature to be differ one after another. Example, most or a lot, and let me use all kind of oral literature are owned by community. It is owned communally. That simply means that there is no anybody who can come and say that this proverb is mine, or this proverb is a property of mine. That's why it is owned by communally. It is not owned individually. But when we can come back on written literature, there are a certain person who owns any kind of written literature. And we can pass through some or a lot of texts or books which have been written by different authors. So in each text, you will meet with a person who wrote that kind of literary work. So due to that, make these two types of literature to differ due to how they differ one after another. Oi. Also, another example, another difference between oral literature and the written literature is through an old. In Kiswahili, we call ukongwe. That simply means that when we speak about oral literature, it is the very oldest one, rather than written literature. That's why oral literature started where people came in this world or started to live or to survive in their environment. But written literature came where people started to discover a lot of writings. So that is another difference between oral literature and oral literature. That's why oral literature it is the very oldest one when it can be compared with written literature. So those 7 are the difference between oral literature and written literature. So after a short discussion about these two types of literature, which are oral literature and the written literature, let us go directly to the oral literature. So oral literature, we will discuss a lot about oral literature and written literature. So let us now start with oral literature. So oral literature refers to the type of literature that is delivered through spoken form or words of mouth. As I told you on the last slide, that's why you have discussed how oral literature can be delivered. So the point which you have to be very careful with is that is delivered through spoken form or words of mouth, as I did here, or as I'm doing here. So oral literature is made by different elements such as proverbs, songs, myths, riddles, recitation, chants, folktales, labias, etc. So those are the examples of oral literature. So after looking the meaning of oral literature as we have discussed it, let us now go directly to the sub-genres of oral literature. So when we speak there, we have to be very careful. That's why we have started discussing about 2 major types of literature, which are oral literature and written literature. After those major 2 types of literature, we started discussing perpendicularly oral literature. That's why we are discussing about oral literature, as you see here. So in written literature, in oral literature, there are subgenres of oral literature which are categorized into 4 categories. The first one is oral narrative forms, and the second one is short formulaic forms, and the third one is oral poetic forms, and the last one is oral dramatic forms. So these are 4 according to those types of some types of oral literature. There are those types of oral literature are categorized into 4 groups, which are oral narrative forms. So here we are going to discuss about oral narrative forms. So those are the stories, but those stories differ one after another. So just wait, we are going to discuss one after another about those narratives. That's why there are some narratives narrations which try to narrate about the originality of something. Also there are some short stories which we deliver on front of the people so as to make people feel so happy. So those are the stories. So how can we name a story that try to make us feel so happy, and how can we name a story that try to tell us about the originality of the something? So those stories we are going to discuss on the first one, which is oral narrative forms, and the second one is short formulaic forms. So there are short expressions which we normally use even in our daily communications. We use those formulaic forms. Also, we are going to discuss one after another. Also, there are oral poetic forms. In Kiswahili, we can call it nyimbo. There are a lot of songs which we deliver by using our mouths. So those songs are not written somewhere. So we deliver those songs by using our words of mouths. So if we are using our mouths to deliver those songs, that criteria make us to say that, or to categorize, or to group that these are oral literature. And the second one is oral, first one is oral dramatic forms. So oral dramatic forms, we can call that, or we may say that maigizo simulizi. That's why there are a lot of actions that can be acted on the people, on front of the people, and when they are acted, there are some characteristics which are being included on those actions which can be done or acted or performed on front of others. So let us start the first one, which is oral narrative forms. So when we speak about oral narrative forms, it is a brief survey of oral literature. It consists of, as the first one is myths. So myths is one among of oral formulaic or oral narrative forms, which is these are stories which talk about how different things originated. So if you are listening, or if there is someone who is trying to narrate on in front of you a story, and that story which is narrated to you tries to give originality about a certain something to happen in this world. And a vivid example of it, there are some stories which are narrated try to give us about how a certain something happened in this world. Example, there is a story which is very common, and it is narrated with a lot of elders which try to tell us about, or to narrate about the friendship which had between a snake and a mushroom. So this story try to give us about why a snake does not have legs. And also this story tries to give us how or why a mushroom does not have eyes. So through those stories, or as this story, you may determine why a snake does not have legs, and why a mushroom does not have eyes. So after looking or after being listening about this story, you have to know that, oh, this makes me to know that why until today a snake does not have legs. Also, there are other stories which try to give us, in Kiswahili we call that a fisi. Kwa nini fisi ana miguu mifupi ya nyuma? Kwa nini fisi have not or have a short legs ambayo ni hapi back legs? Kwa hiyo sasa, after looking those stories, you may determine that why a certain thing come to happen. So here, these are stories which talk about how different things originated. For example, how this came to earth. So there are some stories which try to give why death came in this world. So you may be told that the issue of death came in this world is where people started to be against, we see, God's demands or God's plan, and among others. So you have to know that this is a myth. Also, why animals live the way they do. So you may meet, there are some stories which try to give us a lot of animals, why a lot of animals live in the dense forests, and among others. So you have to remember that if that story talks about originality of a certain something to happen until today, so that is the first one, narrative form. And second one is regent. When you speak about regent, it is a short story handed down from the past, especially one that may not be true, but it has a historical background. So when you speak about regent, it is a short story. It is a short story that handed down, and that is transformed from one person to another, or from one generation to another, especially one that may not be true. So these are the stories which are not believed to have the truth. Also, especially one may not be true, but it has historical background. So it tries to give us a historical background about a certain something, or about a certain event to happen, or about a famous person who lived during that time or long time ago. So that is another type of oral literature which is included on the narrative form. Also, so after discussing these few issues which consists on the oral narrative forms, I mean, we have discussed the only two forms which consists on the oral narrative forms, which are myths and regent. So let us end here on this session, but we will proceed with others on the next session. But there is a task which I prepared so as to do, and by doing this it will help you to know or to find a lot of examples between oral literature and the written literature. And the task is, with examples, differentiate between oral literature and the written literature. So if you were following me about, or when we were discussing about these differences between oral literature and the written literature, it will enable you to differentiate That's why we have discussed a lot about these differences and how oral literature can be differ with the oral literature. So this is a task which are supposed to be performed by you. So let us end here. I wish you all the best. We will proceed in other sessions. Thank you.